Ever get that feeling, like the more information you come across, the
Yeah.
less you actually, understand?
Mm-hmm.
It's like trying to assemble a puzzle, but with like half the pieces missing, and the picture on the box keeps changing.
Yeah.
Well, today we're tackling that feeling head on as we take a deep dive into one of the most influential works in philosophy,
Okay.
Immanuel Kant's critique of pure reason.
Oh, a big one.
Buckle up, because we're about to unravel some serious brain-twisting concepts.
Yeah, Kant's work is really something. It's the kind of book you need to read with like a highlighter in one hand and a strong cup of coffee in the other.
Right.
But don't worry, we've sifted through all of that dense philosophical prose, to bring you the core arguments.
Okay.
And more importantly, like why they still matter even in 2024.
So before we get lost in the labyrinth of Kant's critique, maybe we should start with some context. What was going on in the world of philosophy that made Kant decide to rewrite the rules of, well, thinking itself?
Okay, so imagine a world where philosophers were obsessed with proving God's existence using like only logic, like a cosmic game of Sudoku.
Okay.
That was basically the philosophical scene before Kant.
Right.
Thinkers like Leibniz, Wolff, Baumgarten, they were really into this whole idea of like using analytic judgments to arrive at some like ultimate truth.
Analytic judgments. Okay, now you're just using big words to sound clever.
Right.
Can you break that down for me?
Sure. Imagine you have a cake.
Okay.
And you know it's chocolate.
Yeah.
An analytic judgment would be like saying, this chocolate cake is made with cocoa. You're not really adding any new information. You're just kind of drawing out something that's already like contained within the concept of chocolate cake.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
So where does Kant fit into all of this?
Well, Kant looked at all these attempts to prove God's existence through pure logic, and he thought, hang on a second, this isn't really adding up. He argued that these philosophers, they were kind of mistaking the map for the territory, They were so focused on like analyzing concepts that they'd completely lost sight of the bigger picture, how our minds actually interact with the world.
So he was kind of like a philosophical rebel, shaking things up, challenging the status quo.
Exactly. And this is where his famous Copernican revolution comes in. Just as Copernicus, revolutionized astronomy by proposing that the Earth revolves around the sun, Kant revolutionized philosophy by shifting the focus from the object of knowledge to the knower.
Okay.
To the way our minds structure our experience of reality.
Okay, I'm sensing a major aha moment coming on here.
Yeah.
Walk me through this Copernican revolution thing. What did Kant actually propose that was so groundbreaking? Okay, my brain is still like trying to catch up with this whole Copernican revolution thing. So if we're not just passively absorbing information, how does Kant explain the way our minds actually shape our experience of the world?
Well, to really grasp the essence of Kant's philosophy, we need to delve into his groundbreaking concept of transcendental idealism.
Transcendental idealism. Okay, no, that sounds like something you'd hear in like a philosophy class.
Right.
Not a casual conversation.
Sure.
Let's break it down a bit.
Okay, so imagine you're watching a movie.
Okay.
You see the characters, the scenery, the action unfolding on the screen.
Right.
But what you're actually experiencing is just a projection of light and shadow.
Okay.
There's a whole world behind the screen, right? The projector, the film reel, the sound system, that's all shaping the images that you see, but remains hidden from view.
Okay. Yeah, I'm starting to see where you're going with this.
Yeah. So for Kant, the world we experience, the world of like sight, sound, smells, that's like the movie on the screen.
Okay.
He calls this the phenomenal world.
Okay.
But just like that movie, our experience is shaped by this kind of hidden structure, by the way our minds work, which he calls the noumenal world.
So the noumenal world is like the projector.
Exactly.
The thing that's shaping our experience, but always kind of remaining just out of reach.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
And so transcendental idealism is this idea that the very categories we use to understand the world, things like space, time, and causality, these aren't some sort of objective features of this out there world.
Okay.
But rather, they're more like the lens through which our minds organize the raw data of our senses.
Hold on. You're saying that space and time, like the fundamental building blocks of our reality, aren't actually real. That they only exist in our heads.
It's not that they aren't real. It's more accurate to say that they are not features of the noumenal world. Think about it this way. We experience everything in space and time, right?
Right.
We can't even imagine a world without them. But what if space and time aren't properties of things in themselves, but are instead fundamental structures of the human mind? That's what Kant is saying.
Okay, I'm going to need like a minute to process that.
Yeah.
That's a serious mind bender.
It's a big one.
But if space and time are like mental operating systems,
Yeah.
what else is like shaping our experience?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting.
Okay.
Kant argues that in addition to space and time, there are a whole bunch of other innate concepts. He called these categories of the understanding that our minds use to, like, organize experience.
Categories of the understanding. Okay, now you're just messing with me.
Not at all.
Okay.
These categories are like these built-in filters that shape our perception of everything we encounter. They include things like substance, causality, unity.
Can you give me an example of how these categories actually work in like our everyday lives?
Sure. Imagine you see a vase suddenly fall and break on the floor.
Okay.
You don't just see like a random series of events, a vase, then pieces on the ground. Your mind instantly connects those events and kind of assumes there's a cause. Maybe someone bumped it, or maybe it was precariously perched. But that assumption of cause and effect, that's not something you learn from experience, right? It's hardwired into your thinking thanks to the category of causality.
So it's like our minds are constantly trying to make sense of the world, connecting the dots and looking for patterns, even if we don't realize it.
Exactly.
We're not passive observers, we're active interpreters.
Exactly. And this is where Kant makes a really radical claim. He argues that these categories, they're not derived from experience. They are preconditions for having any experience at all.
Whoa. So you're saying that without these like pre-installed mental categories, we wouldn't even be able to experience the world around us.
That's exactly what Kant argued.
Wow.
Without these categories, our experience would just be this chaotic jumble of sensations, like a TV with no signal, just static. It's these categories that actually make experience possible.
Okay. My head is officially spinning. This is a lot to take in.
Yeah.
But I have to ask, where do the big existential questions fit into all of this? You know, things like free will, morality, the meaning of life. Does Kant just leave us adrift in a sea of like subjected experience? So we've explored this mind-bending idea that our minds are actively shaping our reality. But what about the things that, you know, go beyond just experiencing the world? What about like our values, our sense of purpose, and the big questions about, you know, why we're here?
Right.
Does also just leave us adrift in a sea of like subjective experience?
Well, that's a question that Kant grappled with pretty deeply. While he argued that, you know, we can't directly access that noumenal world, the realm of things in themselves.
Right.
He also recognized that humans, we have this kind of innate drive to ponder the big questions, to seek meaning and purpose, right?
Right. Yeah.
This is where his concept of practical reason comes in.
Practical reason. Okay, another philosophical term to unpack here.
Right.
What exactly is practical reason, and how does it differ from the kind of like reasoning we've been talking about so far?
Okay, so think of it this way. Theoretical reason, the kind we've been discussing, that's like a map maker, right? It helps us understand the lay of the land, how things work in the world.
Okay.
But practical reason, that's like a compass.
Okay.
It guides our actions.
Right.
And it points us towards how we ought to live. It's the realm of morality, ethics, those big existential questions you mentioned.
So theoretical reason helps us to understand the world.
Right.
And practical reason helps us to like navigate it.
Exactly.
To make choices about, you know, right and wrong, purpose and meaning.
Precisely. And here's where Kant makes a really fascinating move. He argues that while we can't definitively prove the existence of God, the soul, or free will through pure theoretical reason,
Right.
we need these ideas as postulates of practical reason.
Postulates.
Yeah.
So it's like saying we can't necessarily prove these things with like 100% certainty, but we kind of have to like assume they're true in order to live a moral life.
That's a great way to put it. Kant believed that morality hinges on this idea of freedom,
Okay.
that we have the capacity to choose our actions. And he argued that this freedom only makes sense in a world where there's some kind of ultimate justice, some kind of cosmic order.
Right.
This led him to posit the idea of God as a kind of guarantor of that moral order.
So even though we can't like empirically prove God's existence, the very act of like striving to be moral kind of implies a belief in some kind of like higher purpose.
Exactly. And this is where Kant's work, I think, gets really interesting. He's not saying you have to, like, accept any particular religious doctrine, but he's suggesting that the very act of, like, wrestling with these moral questions of trying to live a good life, it leads us to confront these bigger metaphysical ideas.
It's almost like he's saying that being human means like grappling with these big questions, even if we can never fully like answer them. It's the questioning itself that really matters.
That's a very insightful way to put it, and I think that's one of the most enduring legacies of Kant's work.
Correct.
He reminds us that while our minds might shape our experience of reality, they also equip us with this capacity for, moral reasoning, for seeking meaning and purpose.
So after this deep dive into the mind of Kant, what's the key takeaway for our listener? Why should someone in 2024, bombarded with information, faced with a world of complex challenges, why should they care about the ideas of a philosopher who lived, centuries ago?
That's a great question. In a world that's awash with information, where it's like so easy to feel overwhelmed by, different viewpoints and conflicting narratives,
Right.
Kant offers us this really valuable framework for critical thinking.
Okay.
He reminds us to question our assumptions, to recognize that our perspective is always, it's always limited, and to approach knowledge with like a healthy dose of skepticism.
So it's about not just accepting things at face value, but really digging deeper.
Exactly.
Understanding the lens through which we're interpreting the world.
Absolutely. And beyond that, Kant reminds us that there are limits to what we can know through pure reason alone.
Oh.
There are questions of meaning, purpose, and morality that, science can't fully answer.
Right.
And he encourages us to engage with those questions, to consider the ethical implications of our choices, and to really strive to create a more just and meaningful world.
It's about recognizing that we're not just passive observers in the world. We're active participants with the capacity to shape our own destinies.
Yes.
And the world around us.
That's a powerful way to put it. And ultimately, I think that's what makes Kant's work so enduringly relevant. He challenges us to think deeply about, who we are, how we know what we know, and how we should act in the world.
Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to ponder today. We've journeyed through the mind of one of history's most influential thinkers. We've grappled with concepts like transcendental idealism, the categories of understanding, and the power of practical reason. It's a lot to digest. But hopefully our deep dive into Kant's critique of pure reason has, sparked some curiosity, challenged some assumptions, and maybe even inspired a few aha moments along the way. If you're ready to delve deeper into Kant's world, we've included some additional resources in the show notes. Remember, the journey of philosophical exploration is ongoing. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and as always, keep diving deep.